Hi, everybody. Welcome to our masterclass today with Barnaby from Pupil Progress. Welcome, Barnaby.
Hi there, Lucy. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. Really looking forward to today's session. We're going to be talking about making Key Stage 3 assessment meaningful. I know you've got a really good, meaty session for us today, so I hope you've all got pen and paper because you might need to take notes. This is going to be really, really helpful for all secondary colleagues out there. So Barnaby, I know you're going to introduce yourself as part of your presentation. Shall I let you get started?
Yeah, I'm happy to crack straight on. So
Brilliant. I'll put your presentation up. There we go. And I'll see you in a bit.
excellent. Thanks, Lucy. So I was a teacher for 12 years, including a director of science and a senior leader with responsibility for data and assessment across the curriculum. And my experience then led me to co-found Pupil Progress with Brett Griffin, who was a fellow senior leader teaching for 12 years as well. Our ultimate goal with this was to build a platform that has bespoke trackers and exam boards specific tracking that would really support all teachers and leaders to get meaningful data and accurate data that really impacts in the classroom, because that's where it's most important. And if we can do that, then we know that we're raising student achievement and also reducing teacher workload. I've personally experienced myself 3 Key Stage 3 curriculum changes in 3 different schools. And now I've worked with over 200 schools and trusts, examining the specific contexts and challenges that they have, any issues that they might have, and their needs and what they're looking to do, advising on then sensible, achievable, impactful changes for their Key Stage 3, and building Key Stage 3 trackers to then match, to evaluate and be able to, again, impact on the actual classroom. And that's really what I'm going to be putting together today in this session on making Key Stage 3 data meaningful. My goal in this is to make sure you got some real tangible takeaways on how you can achieve these goals that you see in front of you. During the workshop, during the masterclass, I'm going to be showing some trackers on Pupil Progress, but really the main thing I'm going to be covering here is the principles that you need to, that are best to really include in looking at your Key Stage 3 attainment curriculum and how you're actually kind of measuring and assessing that. All the things that I'm going to say here are really relevant no matter what system you use to track and monitor your students. So the way I'm going to do this in this masterclass, I'm going to start with going back to how we can actually communicate attainment and progress, differences between the two. And this because I know how important it is to get the fundamentals right first. If you don't get that right, I've seen it before where it just causes so much difficulty further down the line. I've experienced this as well. It's where you tend to see there's resistance from subject leaders who are trying to shoehorn, say, an assessment practice that's a whole school assessment model that really isn't fit for their subject area. And that does build that resentment. It does build that resistance, or it just kind of means that the data ultimately is pretty meaningless and just kind of ends up with a lot of pointless busy work for both you and your staff. So really the tips and advice that I'm going to give you should help you to avoid this. I'll then go on to have a look at how you can actually make it easy for your departments to adopt your whole school's assessment model and the way that you're communicating attainment and progress. And if we get those first 2 bits right, then we're getting really useful data. We're getting actual meaningful data that we can now analyze and use to actually inform our curriculum and our pedagogy so that we can really ultimately raise students' attainment. Again, the whole goal of this process. Are we all speaking the same language? Are we applying it consistently across all subjects? And it's really easy to feel, I think, first off, that when you're looking at other schools, it can sometimes feel like these other schools, they're doing something amazing, elaborate, it's really intellectual, really complicated thing, and that must be fantastic. And that you can kind of be left with that feeling that unless you've got that same level of like elaborate and intricateness, then it's not going to be good enough. But actually, I've kind of seen the opposite. My best advice is just keep it simple. The reason it needs to be simple is your parents and your students need to understand the attainment model you've got. If they can understand it, then you'll be more certain your teachers do as well. And therefore, it's just going to be applied more consistently. So I'm going to kind of look at some ways that we can do that. So to bring it back to the basic, what do we mean by attainment? I always kind of find this really helps give a good grounding. Good assessment should give us this kind of distribution of attainment. We should see which students are doing well compared to our expectation, what we've taught, compared to the students that haven't understood it as well or haven't been able to achieve it as well. That distribution is our ultimate goal, because then we can now start looking at how we can group students and split it up. So the way that you might choose to do this is through a 4-band model, or you might choose a 5-band model. Some schools choose to go for a 9-1 because it fits their context already. They're already kind of using something similar to that with GCSE. And there are some benefits to that because it's easier to adopt. However, there are challenges with each of these models, and particularly with this, where you might then have some other things that you need to work with. We work with a lot of schools to actually just kind of say, these are the highlights, and these are the things that you might come across and how you can deal with it if you go with that model. Some schools want to stay away from any bands or things like that and just want to go for percentages or just the marks and take a comparison to what the average or standard mark is across each of the classes. Now, that's absolutely fine as well. When you do that, though, it's kind of worth being aware that all you're doing is actually doing the same, but you're just using 100 bands and then sort of introducing a scale against that. So really, whichever type of grade you choose, there are strengths and challenges that are unique to them. But again, when you strip it all back, we're just trying to find a clear way to communicate the attainment of each student relative to each other or compared to a given expectation of where they are at in the curriculum and what you've taught. So for this presentation, for this masterclass, I'm going to take the 5-band model, but everything I'm saying here is applicable to any type that you're doing. The reason why I say that is it's quite easy to get fixed on discussions about the number of bands, the name of bands, and that's really not the biggest thing to get hung up on. The key thing here is to support your staff to define what the bands mean, so you then know what to do with them. Where I've seen schools really struggle to implement a model like this is because there hasn't been real common agreement on or anchor for what securing means. So it means something different in French to what it does in English, and how do you make sure that's consistent? If we only state what the words of the bands are, and that's where a lot of schools tend to stop, there's not really an anchor, and it's really hard to get that consistency. But got a solution. This is what I found has worked really, really well when you kind of pitch it up in this way. The best way to do this is to pin your Key Stage 3 assessment between Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 2, because funnily enough, that's exactly where it sits. If a student is getting securing throughout the whole of their Key Stage 3 curriculum, then what we'd expect is that they put themselves in a really good position to get a grade 5 and above at GCSE. If they're getting developing in this model, they're on track for getting a grade 3 at GCSE. And again, that's contingent on what they actually do at Key Stage 4, but they're putting themselves in a really good position for that. If they're getting advancing throughout, then they're on track for a grade 7. And again, these can be adapted to each school and each context to match up with what your specific needs are and what your distribution of grades tends to be. If we look at Key Stage 2 at the other end, that also helps us to kind of see where students have come from. So if a student is a lower prior retainer, our expectation is that they will be getting developing. Now, you notice I've also put in baseline because some schools prefer not just using the English and maths. What about drama and art? Well, if you want to use different baselines or measures, that's absolutely fine. But you can see Key Stage 2 tends to split it into 3. So it's a really good starting point. If you've got a middle prior retainer, our expectation is that students should be getting securing throughout all of their Key Stage 3. And if they're a high prior retainer, we'd expect they'd at least be getting and advancing throughout. So now that we've kind of got both our attainment and what we understand by that, and we've actually got an expectation of what the students coming in should be achieving, it now means that we're in a place where we can actually talk about progress. So with progress, this is about the student's individual attainment compared to their prior attainment. So if we take that middle band student, let's take subject like PE. Now they may come into PE and your first unit is on rugby. And by the end of the unit, the student can run around the field, they can do some simple tackles, and they can pass the ball quite simply. They've met the description and the expectation at that point in the curriculum where they're at. And therefore, I'm going to say they're securing. They've met that expectation. Then they go on to football. And again, by the end of the unit, they're now meeting advancing. That's because they've really picked it up. They love playing football. Their passing is really pinpoint. You know, they're great at actually movement around the field. They understand it. That's their actual attainment. They're at advancing. Then they do badminton. You put them on badminton court and they get developing. And that's because they can't hit a shuttlecock for toffee. They're really struggling with it, but that's absolutely okay. We're reporting on the actual attainment of the student because we know that progress will go up and down depending on the content and the skills that we've been teaching. And we really need to see that to get meaningful data. What we can then see is overall, this student's got securing, advancing, and developing. So we're going to average that out. So actually, they're working at securing overall, but we know their points of weakness, and that's really important. So we can then actually look at supporting them make progress in those areas as well. Now that we've actually got both the attainment and the progress and how that is, the way that we can then show that is the progress can now be shown by color. So we've now split the way and that we're looking at attainment and progress. The color indicates whether a student is above or below their expected attainment based on prior attainment. The color coding on any tracking should really help identify students who are underperforming based on their own prior attainment. And that means we can also celebrate the students who are making great progress compared to their prior attainment. Now we've separated how we define attainment and progress. The word or the grade is the attainment of the student against the expectation for the cohort and where you are in the curriculum. The color is the progress that the student's making compared to their prior attainment or baseline. Now, these models that I've kind of described there with the bands are what we call age-related grade models. Just kind of very quickly compare that to flight path models. Lots of schools are moving away from this and really quite rightly so, because they're really complex and difficult to use. In a flight path model, you tend to see it where you've got, say, 9 to 1, and then you've got 1 plus, 2 minus, 2, 2 plus, and so on. And there's an expectation, it's the important bit, is that a student should move up levels every term or every year. It causes a lot of problem because there is an expectation that kids cannot move down. You cannot make negative progress. And what that kind of means, the teachers are kind of forced to not report on the actual attainment, but just to show that the grades are going down. So you kind of get meaningless data. So we really try and strongly advise moving away from those where you can. And that's something that Ofsted don't like at all either. They know there's age inherent in it, and it's just not meaningful. Whereas in an age-related grade model, what you're kind of comparing is compared to the expectation at the point that they're at in the curriculum. The achievement grade can be the same throughout. So for example, it's great if a student who's expected to get securing is getting securing throughout Key Stage 3, and that's good. We should celebrate that because they're meeting their expectation. In the age-related grade model, the challenge increases as we're going through, not the language that they're using to describe the expected attainment. So you can see here, the level of challenge goes up for securing as we go through the years. Now, the great thing is you kind of don't need to worry about this too much because this is what your teachers will do naturally. They'll be teaching new content, new skills, putting it into more difficult contexts with difficult source material. The assessment might change. So you might have more challenging questions. The source material might be tougher to use, or the mark scheme may have higher expectations. But either way, that challenge and expectation will increase throughout your curriculum. So I think what that now does is it brings us on to flexibility for each subject. And this is because to make sure every subject can adopt the Key Stage 3 strategy really consistently, it needs to provide some flexibility to assess how each subject needs to. It can feel really nice and neat to take one model and think it's going to work across the board. But in all honesty, we do need to have some flexibility because what works for science doesn't work for art or DT. It's great for maths, but it really doesn't work well for drama or for art or even for English. And the way we know this is Key Stage 4 know that as well, which is why English and maths are assessed when you look at their mark schemes in very different ways, even though it still gets distilled down to a mark. So it doesn't exclude the need of a mark, but the way that we actually assess is going to be varied. Each subject will have their own preference, but in the end, I've found that it's a really simple way that you can kind of see how departments kind of self-categorize themselves. And this is it. You're either a department that uses test-driven methods of assessment, or you're a department that does criteria-driven. Your test-driven subjects tend to be subjects like science and maths. They just love doing a test with lots of marks, and we can put grade boundaries against it, and then that's their attainment. We convert that to the bound using the grade boundaries. Other departments tend to like criteria-driven. This tends to be English, art and design and PE, food, things like that. Subjects that like descriptors, where they can actually describe what the attainment level is against that descriptor. And again, we see this at Key Stage 4. That's how it works. To kind of give you or show you an example, Here's a descriptor grid for English. And again, it's very similar to what they see at Key Stage 4, but rather than the words at the top, they've just got a band of marks that they can give the students. Now, with this, you can see for English, they've split it into their skill areas, reading and writing. And then they've also subdivided those into the skills. So content, organization, technical accuracy. And they've got in here what you would expect at this point in the key stage. So these can be year specific. They don't have to be. It depends on the subject. And they will have descriptors for what is securing at this point in the curriculum for content and what they're striving towards. Now, with these descriptors, these exemplars, we have got these as well as resources that we can share with you. So you can use those as a sort of discussion point with your staff or a starting point if you wish. You can see I've done one here for science as well. So this is actually one that I use myself. And it's important to recognize that, like with science here, we had the knowledge and understanding one, which was based on Bloom's taxonomy, but we didn't actually assess using this descriptor grid. It didn't work for science. It's better to do that by tests. So the knowledge and understanding strand, we did 20-mark tests at the right points. And in that, we made sure that we actually had identify and state things that we know are emerging and things that actually applied high level of scientific knowledge in a wide range of contexts. We made sure that was in our assessments, and it kind of helped us framework that. But then we also had our practical work. So when you're doing work scientifically and doing a practical, we would actually assess our planning or the ability to analyze the data and things. We'd actually do that using these descriptor grids. So we actually used a blended method. The point that I'm trying to make is your departments will see this and know what fits best with them. And if we give them that flexibility, it really supports them to actually come on board. So that now kind of brings us on to the tracking of the assessment data and how we can see this. And departments are more able to adopt a new process if we provide them with the right tools. If you do that, this is where I'm going to kind of show you now how this looks on Pupil Progress. If I come into our drama, and let's have a look at our year 7s here. Now, with this, you can see we've got a common structure across all of our trackers. And for this year 7 one, we've got term 1, term 2, we've got a skill summary here, and we've got an overall summary as well. If I expand out that term 1, I can see that we've actually got 3 different assessments that they've sat. They assessed on a piece on Shakespeare, knowledge of the theatre, and Big Day Out. You can also see the skills strands that they've used. So you can see that they assessed in that Shakespeare one, performance and evaluation. This one, it looks like they've done it out of 20 marks. So that's probably a test. And they've done that for knowledge of the theatre. Then Big Day Out, they've gone back to a performance again, and they're using the 1 to 5, where 1 would be emerging, 5 would be mastering. And the great thing is they've actually added in create. So the students actually started creating. Now, what our trackers do is, because we want to make sure this data is meaningful for actually what we need to do in the curriculum, is not just, they've just sat that assessment, that's it. All of those things that are linked to performance are actually linked up on the skill summary. So in this skill summary, we've got the common skills or knowledge areas that we would be assessing throughout the whole of Key Stage 3. And again, that's bespoke to every school and every department, and we support with that. But you can see here, you've got AO1, AO3, AO3, AO4, and it's pulling that data across. And we're also getting an average over the top for how the class is doing across the whole group. If I scroll across, you can also see we've got our minimum target grade or our expectation and what they're actually achieving. And you can see those colors. So straight off, it's really easy to see that Billy and Katniss are struggling a little bit. Lyra and Scout, I should be celebrating because they're doing really, really well. You can see in English, similar idea. We've got term 1. We can see that they've done 2 assessments. One is reading, one is landscapes and poetry. And again, we can see that they've assessed certain skills in each of those areas. And again, that will be pulling through to their skill summary and then to the overall grade. And we're also seeing what their termly grades are, because we can see an average of how they're doing across all of their assessments within that. It means that departments can actually choose how many assessments actually fit for them at the right points in the curriculum. And we've always got this live picture of what the attainment and progress is, no matter what point they're at in their curriculum. If I have a look across at another subject like maths, much more of a test-driven assessment type, then you can see this system still works. So with this one, the only difference is they're actually putting in the max marks. And again, the teachers can do this themselves. They can go through and add their own assessments. So if for example, in maths, I want to add a customized assessment. I can then put that in at the right point for me. I can choose, I'm going to do this in term 2. And for this, we're going to be doing some work on sequences. And for sequences, you could choose, do we want to go into full question level analysis, or I want to break that down? Or do I just want a single mark? Well, do you know what? For this one, I want to keep our workload low. I don't need to break it down any further. You can actually choose 2 skill areas and it will connect that data to both. I can then make sure I can choose the grade boundaries for maths. For those subjects that are descriptor driven, they don't need to do that because, again, 1 can be emerging, 5 can be mastering. And it makes it really nice and simple for them to use. But the idea is we're giving the teachers the tools to actually adapt their tracker and go through this at the right point for them. They can choose the way that they add their assessments and what they're out. Then we can see that that's now been added, and it's really easy and quick for our teachers to just start typing in the marks, and it will then calculate the grade and the progress and show that nice and clearly straight away. The reason why I wanted to show you that is because, again, if I come back to this point here, it actually highlights why we're giving that flexibility to each department to assess in the way that suits them. And we can actually then start really focusing on how that impacts the curriculum. By being clear about our expected attainment, your demonstration of progress comes easier. So we've covered that. We've got clear tracking that all can use, and we've got same language the teachers are all using. They're much more empowered to make sure the data is going to impact on the curriculum. And that's why I really started with that definition that everyone can understand regarding attainment and progress, and a recognition that different subjects may need to be able to assess a test in a test-driven way or a criteria or descriptor-driven way. It also means that you're now in a really good position to give additional guidance, such as how often you expect there to be formal assessments, or if there's particular skills that are common across the curriculum. So, for example, I've seen some schools where they want to make sure that every department is doing at least 20% with knowledge and understanding, and then 30% on application, and the rest is up to them. But you can put that into that skill area so you can also track and see the impact that you're actually having in those areas as well. So now our teachers and leaders, we've covered how we can get to a point where we can collect some useful data, but it's not meaningful yet. And the reason is it's got to impact the students and what we're actually doing in the classroom. Once we've collected all this data, we've got the fundamentals of our language and attainment and progress right. The subjects are now able to assess how and when they need to. They can start answering these questions. We've got our core data in our trackers, but now we can do our subject analysis. We can look at our whole school analysis to see which subjects might need support. And we can also look at meaningful reports for parents. So just to look at that, reports for parents, if we give better information for our parents and students about the skill areas of the Key Stage 3 that are their strengths and weaknesses, they feel much more involved, much more informed, and able to support with this. They can also see those strengths and weaknesses in those skills, and they can see the assessments and what's kind of led to you as a teacher giving them that grade, but also the colour shows them the expectation and whether that's something to be celebrated or is an area of concern for them based on that individual student's own prior attainment. And this kind of takes us back to the purpose of collating this data, and that's to communicate to parents, but also because we need to analyze it to start making good decisions on how we can raise attainment of our students and how to close gaps. It's just not feasible, and it's not good for your teacher's well-being or the students' well-being. The whole point is we're using this data so that we can adapt our curriculum approaches, we can do better support across the subject, and we're actually affecting what each individual teacher is able to look at and impacting their own classrooms and take responsibility for improving. It helps us to look at those curriculum approaches and strategies we might be applying across our departments and across the whole school. With students who aren't making progress, we need to ask, who are they? What are the skills they're struggling on? And what can we do about it? And that first one is, which classes need support? Can you actually see a breakdown of how the classes are doing compared to expectation? So if I come back to our drama tracker here, and we have a look at our subject analysis, again, this is what your tracking should be able to show you, is which classes are doing well and which might be an area of concern. So I can see across my three drama classes here, I can see the percentage of students that are on and off target. And that's nicely easy shown in a graph. And straight off, I'm looking at 7x2. Look, we've got a lot of students here who are off target, and we really are stretching and challenging, getting our kids moving above. So we need to look at what's going on here. Let's provide some additional support. If we look at the grade breakdown, we can also check that distribution. So how many students have we got at each grade and above? We can see that as a percentage. So yes, I'm expecting 97%, 100% to be above developing, where we've got 97. So we're getting there. Curing, fairly much in line. Advancing, not. So there may be something across the department we need to look at in terms of stretch and challenge. If I now actually just have a look at that 7x2 and split that down to them, then we can actually see again what their distribution is, and we can see that they're missing out on a lot of securing that must be getting developing and emerging. So that's what we need to tackle. So straight off, I'm looking here, our higher prior attainers, they're really far off target. So this is actually probably about engagement with our high level students and actually not really challenging them enough or engaging them enough. I'm also seeing another gap here in gender. So actually it's girls. It's really, our high performing girls are an area that we should really look at when we're looking at our class data. And we can do that. So if I come back to the tracker, then we can actually start filtering out some of this data, so that if we have a little look here on filters, and we filter by comparison to MTG, I can choose any of the skills or summary area or any grades within a unit, and I can focus on the students that are off target. Now, before I do that, we can actually see what the overall whole cohort are doing, and we can do this across the whole year group as well. But for this class, it's looking like actually, yeah, A3 and A4 is our area. I add that filter and just focus on the students that are not performing as well, then we can see that really. So if I come back to the tracker, then what we can now do is we could change that. So we could look at this a whole year group, or I'm just going to look at 7x2. And this could be me as a teacher. It doesn't have to be the subject leader. And it is about distributing that responsibility down to our teachers. But we can see across our cohort, look, we're doing well on AO1 and AO2 relatively. AO3 and AO4 are areas where we've got a bit of a gap for them. So if I now come back to the tracker, then what we'll see is we can actually change that to a different class. We could look at the whole year group and see how we're doing. But this is me as a teacher. I want to take responsibility for this and improve my own class group. And I can see AO1 and AO2 I'm actually doing pretty well on. It's AO3 and AO4 where there's a bit of a gap, but it's not massive, but that's something where I want to focus. Now, if I actually filter out against those two groups that we recognize aren't performing as well, I could take the average unit grade and look at the students that are off target. And we're starting to see a slightly different picture. For the students that are off target, it really is AO3 and AO4. So if I make sure that in my next units, I'm focusing on that skill, particularly with these students, then not only are they going to benefit, but actually the whole class will benefit. If I now actually, the other thing that we've spotted was that there was an issue here with our female students in particular that were underperforming. So if I filter that down, we might see something different. And now what we can see is actually there's a real massive gap here in AO3. The AO4 is actually not that bad in these students who are underperforming, which suggests to me, well, this is drama. There's our 3 performance strands. They're actually doing really well on that. It's their knowledge and understanding. And we also saw that there's high prior attainment. So is there an issue here about maybe the level of challenge of work that we're doing that means that they're just not engaging very well? Either way, this is starting to form up questions and things that I can now look at. It might be something that I'm already aware of in the classroom. And that conversation with subject leaders or another support friend within your department can actually kind of give some advice on how can we actually tackle these students? How can we make sure that we raise their attainment in that knowledge and understanding? And of course, with these students, we can actually have that conversation with them. There's no harm in actually pulling this tracker up in front of them, or maybe even getting their reports and saying to them, look, this is what we need to work on for you. These are the areas that you're really struggling on. And this is why I'm going to be focusing on you in this unit of work. Either way, it really drives the motivation of students to actually spot what they need to do and where they need to improve. So really what we've kind of covered here is those 3 questions. We've been able to do that in only a couple of minutes. Which classes need support? We found a class straight off. Which parts of curriculum assessment we could see out across the cohort and particularly for my class. And we could see which students are and aren't making progress. And on our platform, we then tag those students as a particular target group so you can see their progress over time as well. So that kind of leaves us with that last question: which subjects need support? And this is particularly important for your senior leaders or for heads of year that are looking at this information. And you can actually do that in our grade summary. Now, of course, we'd actually do that on ours by going into analysis and into the grade summary area. And you'll then get that picture of how they're doing across all their subjects. Now, I'm going to take this data. This is actually one that I pulled off last week from another school. And we actually had a supportive conversation with them to find out what's going on and how they could support their teachers better. Now, looking at this, I'm straight away looking at this top average row. And there are two departments that are really standing out to me. Three, actually: drama, English, and music. Those ones have all got developing as an average, which means our distribution curve has really been shifted down to that lower end. And there could be loads of reasons around that. Now, in the conversations with those departments for drama, it turned out they hadn't understood the age-related aspect of it. And they kind of expected kids to be emerging in the first term, then developing, then securing. So they were kind of being much harsher rather than actually using the descriptors that they should have had in place and be using. With music, it was actually the assessment that they did. There was moderation in one particular class that's really pulled it down. So they were able to focus in that particular area. But again, it's supporting those conversations around what we can actually do about raising the attainment and whether your assessment's fit for purpose. There's actually two other departments that were also worth focusing on, and that's computer science and Spanish. Now, you can see their averages are advancing, and we can see loads of kids in there that are blue. And again, I think that's a really important conversation to have, because what we're actually saying there, because we've defined what that attainment means, I know that advancing means you're saying that on average, your students are going to be getting about a grade 7 and above at GCSE when they get to that point. Is that really realistic? Or have we just not applied our assessment in the right way, or are there tweaks we need to make? Again, conversation with the departments. Computer science, for them, they did a test. They straight off knew that this was an issue. They'd identified it as an issue, and they said, yeah, our test was way too easy. The marks were really high. So we did two things. One is we supported them with changing the grade boundaries so that they got a better distribution with the data that they had at this point. And the second thing is they're now actually developing their curriculum, because they're going to change the assessment to make sure they've got slightly more challenging questions in there to get a better distribution. We've identified the problem. We're going to change the assessments. It's going to be right for next year. And in the meantime, we're also going to make sure our next assessment has got some more challenging questions. For Spanish, that head of department is a very different conversation. That was much more, they just want the kids to do really well and they want them to be motivated and things like that. So they hadn't really used the descriptors. They just were kind of giving a bit more of a, finger in the air kind of picture of where the kids were at, and they just wanted to be motivated. Again, whole different conversation, whole different challenge for senior leaders and the subject leaders to be working together on. But again, what we're doing is we're improving that curriculum and actually therefore having an impact on what we're actually doing and saying with our teachers. So hopefully by kind of going through these steps, by getting that communicating attainment and progress, by providing flexibility for the subjects, you're then putting yourself to get really meaningful data that only truly becomes meaningful when it's having an impact on the... Now, this helps you to achieve meaningful data in Key Stage 3. And overall, the feedback that we've kind of had from our 200 schools plus schools that we've been working with for just Key Stage 3 alone, the feedback is that the teachers are just so much more better informed. They can plan more strategically. Overall, their well-being is improved because they can see the impact that this is having on their students. No one wants to be just typing in random pointless numbers into a system at 2 points or 3 points in the year, knowing that all we're doing this for is just to give the parents an idea of where they're at. When you actually got something that actually has an impact on the work that you're doing, it actually has a meaning to doing it. I'm actually more excited to do that because I know I can see how well we're doing and what we can actually do about it. That does have that massive impact on the teacher's well-being. It also improves that communication across the school, because you saw how easy it was to look at 3 different subject trackers, and straight off, I don't have to be a subject specialist, but I can spot patterns. So I know the questions to ask and work with those subject leaders. So it really helps to actually bring a real data, a focused culture. And this is, again, the feedback. We actually had this from a study that we did alongside NCFE in 10 of our schools, 12 actually. And there were so many of the schools that said there was a real culture shift where teachers were actually engaging with their data a lot more effectively because they knew it had an impact on the overall results and what they were doing. And they had the tools, they had the framework to actually help with this. If you want further support with your Key Stage 3 curriculum, then use the QR code here or use the link that you can see at the bottom of the page, that website. And you can use that to then book a call with our team. You don't have to have a subscription with Pupil Progress. You can just have this as a conversation chat. We can kind of pick up where your context is, what your particular need is. And my advice is don't kind of just go, first of all, we're going to get our curriculum right, and then we'll do this. My advice is just have that first conversation. We can give you lots of resources, lots of advice to support you with that whole process so you can kind of build on what you've already got. That's really what we want to do. You're going to have good practice in your school. It's about just making small tweaks, changes. We work with lots of different contexts around this. If you're a school that already has a subscription with Pupil Progress, you're tracking at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 already, then all you need to do is have a chat with your account manager. You can use these links as well to start the conversation, or just email your account manager. They're experts in this area too, and will be able to give you the right advice and guide you in your next steps. So I guess this is just the point really to round up and say thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful. And if there are any resources or the presentation you want to see, then those are also available to you as on our site. Okay, thank you.
So thanks, Barnaby. That was really helpful. And it was really good to see, the importance of simplicity, keeping it simple. I do feel that these things should not be overcomplicated because the important thing is, are the children or the students learning? So we need to be focusing on that rather than how do we work and how to assess them. So that was really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Barnaby.
It's so true, actually. The thing is that I've always kind of fun with the images and things, like the couple of the images that we actually do. So this image here that I've got, and this one here about the progress and where it fits against the two. When you show parents, they just really get it. Definitely is one of the things that when you do that, that's part of the fear. Can we explain this to parents? And when you kind of, complicated you make it, the harder it is for people to engage with. So, whatever you can do to keep it simple, it works.
Yeah, that's super. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. So if you want to contact Barnaby's team, Pupil Progress, go to pupilprogress.com/talk to an expert. And if you want to just head over to their website, it is pupilprogress.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social media at Headteacher Chat, or you can send us an email to info@headteacherchat.com, or you can pop over to our website, headteacherchat.com. That was a really useful session. Thank you so much for joining us, Barnaby.
Excellent. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.